my mic on here? Oh, there it is. Okay, yes, great. Well, the last session, you guys are hanging in there. I had a couple of questions I want to get to now, because they fit with what we just got done saying, and then some I might save till after this last session. There's a question about confidentiality and reporting, and it's a great question. So anytime you go to professional counseling, your therapist will always explain to you that your information is confidential. It means they won't share your information outside of that agency. The only exceptions to confidentiality is if there's a threat to hurt yourself or someone else, or there's a report of child abuse. Essentially, if there's any physical safety concerns, right? If there's a physical safety concern, they will report that to someone, at Children's Services or law enforcement if necessary. But outside of a physical safety concern, they won't share your information with other people unless they have your permission. Like if you want them to coordinate with somebody, you can. You would sign a release of information. I'll actually talk about this again later, but you'll sign a release of information, and that gives the therapist permission to talk with whoever you pick that they can now talk with. But we always tell people, the person getting help, the client, like, oh, you have a right to control your information. And so you can pick who you would like us to be able to talk to, and otherwise we don't. So, but that's the big thing, is physical safety concerns. We will report those. Yeah. And then, is medication addictive? Is it okay to be on it long term? Most medication is not considered addictive. Most mental health medication, sometimes it's called psychotropic medication, is not considered addictive. SSRIs, for example, are not generally thought of that way. There are types that are. So there's a class of medication called, not that you guys have to know all this, but called benzodiazepines that can be addictive. They're generally intended for short-term use. So something like Xanax or Klonopin or like that class of medication, it is the medication itself that is creating the effect, kind of like alcohol would. You do build a tolerance to it, and you can become addicted to it. It has street value. And so they're usually prescribed with a little bit more caution, and they're generally intended to be short-term, right? Like if, for example, someone with post-traumatic stress disorder is getting in this alarm state so much that we can't make any headway with counseling because it's just always too much, then some of this type of medication can help for a season while they're getting counseling, and then it'll be tapered off. The only times I've ever encountered somebody with panic attacks that I wasn't able to help get rid of the panic attacks was because they had an addiction to some of these medications. So, because with panic attacks, you have to be willing to not be afraid of it and to face it. And if you have a pill that will just take it away, and you have a doctor who will just keep giving it to you, you can, yeah, you need to have more caution with that type of medication. Some of these I'm going to save. Okay. If you suspect someone has bipolar, how can you encourage them to get diagnosed? Again, sort of what I shared in the first group, the last message was, checking in with them, letting them know you notice, letting them know you care, encouraging them to go. Another thing that Springhaven will do to kind of soften that first visit is what we offer what we call free half hours. So a free half hour is just you can let someone know who's struggling, like, hey, you know what? Like, even if you're not ready, you don't want to commit to counseling, even if you don't want to why don't you just go meet them? You know, just sit and just meet them one time and see if, oh, maybe they could be helpful. You know, just check it out. So it's free. You just schedule it, you know, do a half hour. And sometimes that sort of softens it for them to be able to come in and begin engaging with help, right? Okay, I'll save the rest of these. All right, so last section, and I'm going to talk a little bit more to my walk with them people, right? So what is it like to walk with somebody who has mental illness, who's struggling? I want to start by understanding our boundaries. I think that was maybe the name of this one, was boundaries. And so a lot of this material will come from Henry Cloud and John Townsend wrote a book years ago titled Boundaries. And so a lot of they're Christian psychologists. It's a great book. I'd encourage you to check it out. But a lot of these concepts in the beginning come from them. And so just to, again, some framework to get our mind around it, we'll go back to some pretty bad drawing. All right. Does anybody know what this is? Any guesses? No? A ladybug? I don't know. All right. That's a knapsack. That's right. There you go. That's a knapsack. Some people I've heard them called hobo sticks, right? You sort of picture like a stick with a handkerchief and you kind of put your sandwich in it. That's a knapsack. A knapsack is a stress that we are expected to carry ourselves and we are capable of carrying ourselves. We are expected and capable of carrying ourselves. So, like, I have a knapsack of, like, I'm expected and capable to go to work, you know, roughly, 40 hours a week or so, to meet with people, to do paperwork. That's all part of my knapsack. Mowing the lawn, taking out the trash, that's part of my knapsack. Helping raise the kids, that's part of my knapsack, right? I'm expected and capable to be able to do this. Now, it can shift, right? Like, if I get a flu, right? Then all of a sudden, this is not my knapsack anymore. Like, I'm not capable of going to work for that moment, right? It can shift, and then it kind of becomes my knapsack again when I'm able, right? So I'm expected and capable of doing it. That's a knapsack. All right. Any guesses what we got there? It's even worse. Yes, only people who'd read the book could even guess this. That is a boulder. That is a boulder. A clear and elegant drawing of a boulder. A boulder is a stress that we are not capable of carrying ourselves. It's a stress we're just not capable of carrying. We need help with. Same type of stress we need help. When my septic system broke, that was a boulder stress for me. I am not capable of fixing that myself. We name these to just recognize there are a couple of problems that we tend to run into. And so there's two issues that we might fall into with knapsacks. The first one, I think I'm going to not write it out. You might take notes if you want. The first one is carrying other people's knapsacks. Carrying other people's knapsacks. That's the first problem that we run into. We have an expectation in my house that for the kids, they have little cubbies for their shoes, and we say, when you come into the house, you take your shoes off, you put them in the cubby, right? So they are capable of this. My wife and I have determined they're capable, and we have placed this expectation upon them. So what my son likes to do is run into the house and just kind of kick his shoes off as he's running through, and then, so they're like spewing about, and then he runs and plays, right? That is his preference. Now, in that moment, the easiest thing for me to do is to pick up his shoes and put them in the cubby. It takes me a second, super simple, easy to do. The problem with that is I am now carrying his knapsack. Now, here's the pain. If I tell him, like, hey, buddy, go put your shoes away, like, he might do it well. Like, there are times that he's like, oh, okay, and he grabs it. Like, that can happen. Some of you are laughing, like you know, some people have also raised kids. There are times that I will say, put your shoes away, and he will fall on the floor and cry. He will say, I can't do it. My battery will empty. You know? And it is trauma for him to put his shoes away. And now I've got to parent this, right? Like, I've got to stay calm, but I've got to continue to, like, I hear you, partner, but, you know, like, you know the rule, you know. You'll be okay. I think you'll figure it out. Here, why don't I help you? Like, I'll walk with you. I'll open the drawer for you. You throw them in. You know, and it is easier sometimes to just do it for them. That doesn't help them get better at anything. If I do that for him, I can imagine a few other things are going to start to slip, right? Like, I expect him to take his plate to the sink after dinner. Like, might start experimenting with not doing that. Fine, I'll just do it, right? Like, lots of things might start slipping. And while doing it in the moment is not that big a deal, once I've developed a lifestyle where I just keep doing it all the time, eventually enough of his knapsacks get heavy. I get frustrated. I get annoyed. And why don't you ever do this? Right? Like, I snap at him. Well, it's not his fault. I'm the adult. I'm the one choosing to carry his knapsack. I'm the one choosing to not enforce that in his life. And so he's not growing. He's not getting better. And I'm burning out. Right? It's an easy problem. I think lots of times we feel like, it's being nice. It's being kind, like, I'm just caring. I'm just providing support, you know. If we're going to be wise helpers, then we ought to know when it's helpful and when it's not. There's a great book out called When Helping Hurts that kind of dives into this topic. It's more about overseas missions and things, but it does explore this idea really well that just being nice or doing something for somebody is not always the wise way to be helpful. That's not always even very loving, honestly. Sometimes if we explore ourselves, we might say, like, why am I kind of compulsively just do stuff for people, and I feel like I have to. I feel like I'm supposed to. Maybe I feel like I'm not very valuable unless I am doing this stuff for other people, right? And I'm sort of missing my own sense of value, right? And so when we're not just giving compulsively because we feel like we have to, or we feel like we need to, or we can begin to be wiser about when and how we help. So that's the first one, not carrying other people's knapsacks. Another problem that for some people they may get into is not carrying their own knapsack, right? That could happen. Just not carrying their own knapsack. Sometimes this happens. You may just have certain things that are yours, but you just like to avoid, and you like to not do, and you like to, so I'll get into other stuff so that I don't have to do what I really ought to be doing. And I'm busying myself to avoid something. And then I might dump it on someone else, right? Oh, last minute, this all needs done. Okay, you guys need to, and I'm dumping on someone else. Sometimes, obviously, kids will sometimes, like, it's kind of fun to get out of a chore, I didn't have to take care of my goats, haha, But when you develop a pattern of not carrying your own knapsack, it tends to make you feel worse about yourself. Like there is some sense of accomplishment in doing things. And when you're not kind of tending your own garden, and when you're not handling your own knapsack, like it does, you feel worse about yourself. And so there are two simple things, right, with knapsacks. Not carrying our own knapsack and carrying other people's. And so with boulders, there's a couple of issues we can get into here. The first one is not asking for help. Not asking for help. This is easy to do, right? First, we maybe don't recognize we need help. And then maybe we see we need help, but we're a little, maybe if we're honest, a little proud. When we were first married, this was before GPSs. Or maybe they existed, but they were rare, like we didn't have a GPS. So we have this handwritten directions. A lot of our friends were getting married. We have these handwritten directions, and we're headed to a wedding, and we're traveling, and like, okay, I got this road. I'm looking for the next one. We're moving. It's getting like a little bit like, are we gonna make it on time? Like, oh, we're gonna be okay. We're gonna be okay. My wife comes up with this crazy idea that I ask for directions, and I was fine. I was fine. And so we just keep going. We keep going. Eventually, it's beginning to look to me like there's a chance we missed the road, you know? And so I don't need to ask for directions. I just need to, obviously, I just go back the other way, and we'll go slow at every and I'll find it when we head back, right? And it's like, man, the longer that we go not asking for help when we need it, sort of the bigger the problem gets. So we were late to the wedding. I think we made it to the reception on time. We made it to the reception on time. But that can be a problem, not asking for help, right? Whether it's pride, whether it's not knowing how to ask for help or who to ask, and it just makes the problem bigger. When we're dealing with mental health, like you can sort of imagine, like if I believe that I can like push a wall over, right? I've got this boulder that I clearly can't do, but I think I got this. I can do this. Or I just have so much shame. Like with mental health, I feel like, well, I should be able to handle my own stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I should be able to. And so I'm trying to push this over, and it is not budging. What happens? Time keeps going. I keep pushing. I'm getting more and more tired. I'm getting more and more exhausted. I keep pushing. I feel defeated. What is wrong with me that I can't do this? How messed up am I that I can't do this? And I'm tired, and I'm feeling terrible about myself. And it just hasn't clicked. Oh, I need help. It's just not something that's meant to be handled alone. I need help. And then when we find the right help, oh, what do you know? Things start going a lot better, right? But it's one problem that we can get into, not asking for help. The other, not helping others well. Not helping others well. So I'll explain what I mean by that. When we help other people, if we're in a pattern where we're not helping others at all, we're living a pretty insulated life, that is also depressing. It feels good to help people. And living in Christian community and helping and serving others, like, oh, that feels good, and we ought to be doing that. I say not helping others well because sometimes when we're helping, we're carrying a knapsack, right? Also, some people know, it's kind of been said a lot, that when you're swimming, drowning victims will oftentimes drown in pairs. What happens is somebody's struggling in the water, right? And then someone sees and they swim out to try and save them. The person who's struggling is terrified and latches on, right? And then they both drown together. If you're going to help people, keep one hand on land, right? make sure you're in a good place to give. If you're not managing your own knapsacks, if you are overwhelmed, you might not be in position to be helping, right? Make sure that you have capacity to give. Give out of your abundance. If you're irritable and grumpy about giving, you're probably not following these principles well. Giving should be a joy. And so make sure you have capacity to give, and make sure that what you're helping with is a boulder, that you're not just carrying their knapsack. Now, unfortunately, as you go through life, it's not clearly labeled, right? Like someone says, hey, can you help with this? And there's not some sign over their head that's like, oh, that's a knapsack, right? Like, that's a boulder. It takes discernment. It takes wisdom, right? Which is why life takes community, right? You've got spiritual leaders, you've got friends, you've got people that you can process with, that you can get help with, that you can sort of discern and pray and listen. Like, okay, is this something I ought to engage, or is this something I ought not, right? I should have a concept or a filter of knowing when I say yes and when I say no, and I ought to be able to say no, right? And in fact, every time I say yes to something, I do say no to something else, right? And so I should be intentional with my time and my effort. And it's not, I don't mean to make it more simple than it takes. It takes wisdom and prayer and discernment, sometimes community about, well, what is this and how do I engage this, right? But you can sort of begin to think through it. But, all right, well, is this a knapsack? Is this a boulder? How do we begin to, do I have capacity? How do I choose what I engage, right? Okay, so that's one way to think through how to help or when to help. So let's just say that you've done, so the previous session, you've done that stuff. You've noticed they were struggling, you've checked in, you've prayed, you've done that stuff. And now you're saying, yeah, but I want to really be able to walk with people. What other advice? So what do I do? So one thing that I would, learning more about what they're going through is an important part of that. So if you begin to learn as you walk with them, it's some diagnosis, learning more about it can be useful. And sort of understanding their process can be helpful. So there's, I guess we'll write this. This model was developed, I'm going to talk about the stages of change. The stages of change. This model was developed originally in the addiction community, so people dealing with, originally it was alcohol addiction. It could apply to any addiction. I also think you can apply it to mental health other mental health issues as well. But the different stages of change that people go through so you're thinking about, man, this person's struggling with mental health. What does that feel like to them? The first stage is called pre-contemplation. Pre-contemplation just means to contemplate is to think about, so before I'm even thinking about changing. I'm drinking, I'm using drugs, I'm kind of stuck in my mental health issue, I'm stuck there and I'm not even thinking about change. It's fine with me, I don't notice it or I don't care, it's fine with me, I'm in pre-contemplation. The next is contemplation. Now I'll say what generally moves people from one stage to the next is pain. In seminary, one of the sayings that professors would share, it'd say, until the pain of staying the same becomes bigger than the pain of changing, people will tend to stay the same. Usually it's pain. I'll just keep using addiction language for this to make it more simple, but if someone has a bad hangover, someone hurts someone's feelings, someone gets a DUI, someone loses a job, like when there is pain, that tends to move them through the stages. So the next stage is contemplation. So I'm beginning to think about change. I'm thinking about changing. This is that phase of like, man, I ought to do something about this. Man, this isn't good. I'm in contemplation frequently about exercise. Man, I should start exercising. Like, I haven't done anything about it yet. Man, I ought to do something about that, right? And so the next stage is planning. So I make some plan. I say, okay, I'm going to change. I'm going to change. So for, say, someone with, again, addiction, drinking, they say, I'm going to, okay, I'll just stop drinking. Pure willpower, I'll just stop drinking. Or they might, you know what? Weekends only. Weekends, you know, okay, you know what? No more drugs, just alcohol, right? Just weed, that's it. Nothing else, just, they make some plan of how they're going to change. And then we call this action. They put that plan into action. They attempt to do it, right? Whatever it was they had planned, they attempt to do it. And then the next commonly is called relapse. They fail to do it, right? Like, I'm just going to stop. And then they don't stop, right? That's a tough spot for people if they are, because when they think about it, they're saying, man, I attempted to do something, and I was not capable of doing what I attempted to do. This thing is a bigger problem than me. I'm not able to fix this. Like, that's kind of a scary moment for people. Like, I'm not in control of myself, right? Like, that can be a scary moment for people. A lot of times people feel a lot of shame in that spot. And where they can end up going is back to pre-contemplation. You know what's easier than thinking about, I'm a failure, is thinking, you know what, it's honestly not that big a deal. You know, like, drinking, it's like, whatever, that's fine. You know, sometimes we call that, just another word, we call that denial, right? There's different types of denial, right? Denial of events, right? It didn't happen. I'm not using it. I am not, right? Denial of impact. Yeah, sure. But it's not that big a deal. It's not hurting anybody. It's not, you know. Or denial of responsibility. It's not my fault. I've got a lot going on. You're not helping any. Like, it's not my fault, right? Now, pain will tend to move them, and they'll move through. If they have a plan that works and they're able to put it into action successfully, then they move into this. What we call maintenance, right? Which is just this phase of recognizing that, boy, with addictions, we don't really say, oh, you're cured, as in, oh, now you can drink normally and it won't become a problem for you. Usually we use the word maintenance, that like, oh, sobriety is probably going to be what you need in order to stay healthy. And while usually it's like 6 months or a year of being sober, being clean, that like, the recovery work is a lot easier than it used to be. The cravings, the triggers, they're not as hard as they were before. Relapse is always possible. Go to any like AA room and you'll see people that were like, yeah, I was like 12 years clean and then I just got off my guard and then I got back into it. So while relapse is always possible, it does get easier after, 6 months, a year, learning new skills. But usually when people are struggling, they're feeling shamed. They're feeling ashamed. They don't like that they're struggling. They oftentimes have what counselors are trying to pull out in them is called ambivalence, right? What people feel, ambivalence just means to feel two opposite things pretty strongly, right? And so while they might be saying, I'm fine, they are also feeling, I am not fine. And they don't always want to admit that, right? They're at tension with themselves. And so we're trying to guide them through the process. We're trying to guide them through that, you know what, if they relapse, let's just come back to the drawing board and let's improve the plan. Okay, how'd that happen? Let's set things up better for you so that that doesn't happen again. Like, you would like to stop viewing pornography, but you keep doing it. How is it that that keeps happening? Oh, continually on your computer in the basement. All right, well, let's make some changes, right? Let's go ahead and get rid of that computer. Let's put accountability software on it. Let's adjust the plan to better support your recovery. And then, if a relapse happens again, let's not freak out and go back into denial and then be away from treatment for a year while you're just, back into an unhealthy pattern. No, come right back to the drawing board. Let's keep adjusting. Let's keep tweaking. Let's keep helping figure out how do we support your recovery. And you can sort of think of that word recovery plan for any issue, whether it's addiction or mental health or whatever else. A recovery plan is just essentially what are the things, what are the tools, that help support you doing better. So once a person's engaged in therapy, I use the words therapy and counseling and therapist and counselor all interchangeably. Once a person's engaged, then they have a therapist who has a recovery plan for them, right? Like, they're with somebody who understands what's going on, who's able to diagnose. Maybe not after the very first session does the counselor have everything all figured out, but after a few sessions, they're with somebody who understands what's going on and is able to develop a recovery plan. What sets you up for success? What are some of the tools that you need to help you do better? What are some of the things you need to be working on? What is some of the things you need to be changing about your life to set you up for success, right? It's your recovery plan. If you are walking with somebody who is struggling, then learning about if you are close enough with them to really walk with them, you can learn about their recovery plan. You might ask them about it. Hey, yeah, tell me more about, what is helping you, what you're watching out for, tell me more about. If they're open to it, you can ask them to sign a release of information with their therapist. So support people who are in a very intentional relationship with a hurting person can do that. You can talk directly to the counselor, right? And that way, the person that we're caring for, it helps so that you're not only learning what they're able to tell you or what they choose to tell you, you can learn what the therapist thinks about it, right? And then you can get a much clearer picture of, okay, so this is what we're watching out for. When these things happen, this is how we ought to respond to it. Okay, this is the recovery plan. As a support person, if you know the recovery plan, you've really got your hands around how you can be helpful, okay? Just another little tip, little thing. Sometimes support people will say, call me. Hey, if you need anything, call me. That never works. It just doesn't. In 18 years of therapy, I can't think of one person who has ever actually called somebody when they needed help in that type of relationship. What could work, what some people have done, I've kind of learned this from other people who've kind of been through, I learned sometimes the people I'm helping teach me a lot more than I teach them. But you can text each other daily. I'm going to text red, yellow, or green every single day. That's it. It just takes a second, red, yellow, or green. Okay, great. If you're doing great, You text a green. On the fence, yellow. Feeling pretty down, feeling pretty, red. Great. If a person in this type of relationship doesn't send a text, you text, hey, what's up, man? Right? Like we said we were doing this every day. What's happening? How are you doing? You get a yellow, maybe you give them a phone call. You check in. Like, hey, no, man, just saw the yellow, praying for you. You see a red, like, as a support person, hey, maybe you want to grab some coffee? Hey, you know what? Let's grab the poles. Let's go fishing. Let's talk, right? If you set the expectation where we're going to be doing this daily, and if we don't do it daily, we will check in, that keeps you connected with them. But don't think they're like, oh, just call me if you need anything. Like that, it's a polite thing to say. It just doesn't help people. Be their friend. Be their friend. I've got 6 points. We're on point number 3 right now. We've got 6 points. Be their friend. Go fishing. Oftentimes, if they're struggling, friendship is one of the most helpful things. What's going on oftentimes inside a person's head is this tape of like, I'm no good, I'm a failure, like something's wrong with me, I'm more messed up. Being treated with respect and kindness, you seeing their value in them and then treating them with value and respect does more for them than almost anything else you can do. Be a friend. Hang out. The idea of empathy is important here. So empathy is just the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and to feel or experience what they are experiencing. It's not saying like, oh, I get exactly what it means to have post-traumatic stress disorder. But you can be in a relationship with somebody where you're not trying to just give them advice and fix them. You're willing to listen. It's like, hey, you're not a crazy person. You're a human who's struggling with something that I don't understand a ton, but I'm willing to learn. What is this like for you? I have a posture of being willing to ask questions and to not judge, right? Just to listen compassionately, to put myself in their shoes. For most of us, we could sort of imagine, like, boy, if I had that going inside me, that would drive me nuts. Like, I get why this would be so hard for you. You know what I mean? Like, if I had this persistent thought in my head all of the time, so this is like OCD, like one version would be, I have this persistent thought all of the time that what if I get sick, I need to clean, so that I'm spending 4 hours a day scrubbing my floor, and I know that I shouldn't be doing this. I know that I should be playing with my kids. I know that I should be not just like cleaning. But I just can't relax. I can't get that thought out of my head unless that thought just keeps, like, yeah, that doesn't happen to me. I don't have OCD. But if it did, that would be no, I get why it's so hard for you. I get why that's so hard for you. Treating people with respect and kindness, empathy, just be their friend. Know your limits. Know your limits. Keep an eye on your own stress cup, right? Keep your eye on your own stress cup. Keep an eye on your own self-care, your batteries, how you're recharging. Some people thought that fun battery should be emotional. It probably should be emotional. Emotional, I think of joy. I think of fun, like how we, recharge. But keep an eye on your limits and be able to say no. If you don't feel like you can say no and you are feeling drained, you have some work to do to be a wise helper. You have some work to do to be a wise helper. I don't have it all figured out, obviously. But I've been in the mental health field for 18 years. In a given day, I can hear 6 stories of people struggling, 6 lives affected, and I'll repeat it the next day, and the next day, and the next day, right? Now, it's what I do I'm not doing some other job and then doing that. Like, this is what I do. But having a sense of boundaries, knowing my limits, knowing what I can and can't do, taking care of my own emotional and spiritual life, are all part of how we're able to give out of God's abundance in our life without turning bitter, without burning out, without getting just exhausted. And going through seasons of exhaustion are normal, like it happens. But don't just keep your head down and keep plodding forward. Figure it out, right? Figure it out. How do you recharge or take care of yourself in a way that you're in a position to be helping? And when you're not in a position to be helping, knowing what and how to say no. Yes, being able to say no, and then getting support. You don't need to be a helper alone. I don't think I would have lasted as a therapist by myself. If I were in a private practice where it were just me, I think I would have burned out. It helps me a ton that I go into an office with a bunch of other therapists and that I can talk to them about how I'm doing and vice versa, right? Be in a supportive community, right? And so whether that's with other people in your church, other caregivers, other people, if you're giving out, you need to be bringing in. And so you need to be being cared for. Getting your own counseling. There's lots of support people that are they're burned out, right? They give and they give and they give and they give, and they are depleted. And honestly, they're in depression themselves. It is exhausting. When you love someone and you care about them and you see that their life is a wreck, it impacts you, and it should. Like, you care, right? And maybe you need help too, to deal with that, to recognize, okay, what I can and can't do, and to process the feelings of just loving someone who is hurting and who you can't make get help. You love somebody who may continue to struggle, who may get worse before they get better. So get help yourself. Get help yourself. Okay, so it's boundaries, how to help others. We have space for questions. I have a few more questions up here, but feel free, if you have questions, you can take them to the back box. You're welcome to do that. You can bring them forward, or put them at the edge of your pews. I think Steve may go around and grab cards if you have questions, or hold them up. But I also want to just give space for people to just ask. So yeah, this is it. This is the end of our retreat. So I'll be with you tomorrow morning. You're going to hear a lot of the same stuff. I warned everybody. It's going to be repeat material tomorrow morning. But what other questions do you have about mental health, about helping, about this? I'll go into some of these while you guys are doing that. Is there ever a point in time that a therapist-client relationship goes on too long? Is it beneficial to switch counselors after a number of years? That's a good question. So Sort of the lines that I use when I'm thinking through that is, if I'm in a helping relationship, as a professional therapist, if I'm helping somebody, if I need to be aware of what's called maximum therapeutic gain. The idea is that me continuing to meet with them won't get them more better, and not meeting with them won't make them worse. If I hit that point with somebody, I need to stop the counseling relationship. I don't want it to be a dependent relationship. The goal of counseling is not it's not a lifelong friendship, right? It's meant to be to help with something specific. And it's okay if that takes 3 sessions or if that takes 6 years, but I'm helping with something specific, and that if we removed that help, you would get worse, or that help is continuing to create benefit. But if it's not creating benefit, then counseling ought to end. Counseling also ought to end when you reach your goals, right? So when you are feeling better and capable of, you don't even have to be perfect, obviously not perfect, but you don't even have to have all of your symptoms resolved. You need to be able to keep making progress without counseling. So once you get enough tools and support around you that you can keep making progress without counseling, that's okay, you can be done with counseling, yeah. In terms of switching counselors, sometimes the switch is helpful. It is important that you connect with your counselor, that you click. And there is just personalities, right? Some people you just click with more than others. Finding the right person is important, so keep looking for the right counselor. I will say, as the clinical director at Spring Haven, I sort of also organize and manage the other therapists. And sort of my guideline for people is, if a client wants to change therapists, then I always say, that's great. Go ahead, you can do that. If they want to change a second time, I usually say no. Because I want to avoid this maybe client's pattern of always wanting something else, and it's always someone else's problem, and I want them to start to look inward. And so I'll let, so my sort of rule of thumb is like, I let people shift once, but I don't want a pattern of shifting, because I do want them to be reflecting on themselves. How does one handle the stress of maybe I did this one. The stress of a person constantly calls with demands. I did that. But knowing your limits. So I worked with a pastor one time who did an amazing job at this. He was helping support a young lady with some mental health issues who was excessively needy. She was in her low 20s and didn't have a lot of friendships, and she would take all week if she could, right? Like, she would just talk with him all the time. And so he came up with a plan, and I forget the exact details, but it was something like, listen, you can have an hour a day between these hours. If you call me, and then, and that was just for a brief time, and then it was, okay, you can have 20 minutes a day. You can have an hour once a week, otherwise you can have, and then it decreased, and it decreased, and it decreased. And lovingly and respectfully, no, I care about you. You're an important part here. I love you. But this is the amount of time I have. And so it did some work to try and get other relationships also in her life and other friendships also in her life, and then just kept kind of decreasing listen, you can call me. You can call me any day. I'm only going to answer you once a week. And so just so you know, right? Like, I care about you, but I can answer you once a week. As a professional therapist, our boundaries are super easy, right? Like, I know that I have a 1-hour session, and that when that's over, I'm going to move to someone else. And so, and then I also know, so I'm not, I don't provide emergency service. I don't have 24-hour care. There is a crisis line in Wayne and Holmes counties that is 24-hour care. You have an issue 24 hours a day, they can't. And emergency rooms open 24 hours a day. There are ways that you can get help 24 hours a day. I will not give you care 24 hours a day. When I go home at night, I'm going to be home at night. I'm going to be with my family. Pastors have it harder, right? Because they don't have quite as clear lines as we do. But yeah, knowing your limits, what you're able to give, and trying to make that clear. You can do that in a loving and kind way, but making it clear what you're able to do. Yeah. Yeah, here's a question about, loving your neighbor as yourself. And do we really all know what it means to love ourselves? And can we just assume everyone knows how to do that? I don't assume everyone knows how to do that, or that everyone does. I think that's something that oftentimes we have to repeat and remind ourselves that, no, God loves me. I'm worthy of love. It is okay for me to be loved and to feel loved. People go through spiritual direction for years, finding different layers of accepting that truth, right? Yeah, that's something you can soak in for a very long time. I think different forms of self-care are ways of loving yourself, right? Those are specific ways of getting into how to love yourself. And yeah, whether counseling or pastoral counseling or spiritual direction are all sort of ways of engaging this and allowing yourself to accept love. Yeah. All right. We're doing good. So just a couple more here, and then we'll get to lunch. Good question. So, do different people sort of have different size knapsacks? Or maybe, I think they already, are the sizes of knapsacks changing, right? Yes, different people are wired different. Different people have different gifts and abilities. And sure, yeah, some people are going to just, their temperament, are going to be able to do more than others. My knapsack is much bigger than my 4-year-old's, right? I think the important thing is recognizing what it is and not judging. I think that it is, this is kind of the challenge of supporting people with mental health is you kind of walk that line of what is their knapsack? What should they be doing and what shouldn't they? Are they capable of doing this, or are they just not carrying their own knapsack, or is that a boulder? You know what I mean? And just because they're struggling with mental health doesn't mean they can't also use manipulation to not carry their own knapsack. Yeah, that absolutely can happen, and it is a big challenge, and it's why helping people takes prayer and discernment and counsel. We shouldn't just assume that, so I know exactly what it is now. No, you're gonna do a lot of figuring things out as you go, and getting help from other people who have experience helping can be useful. Processing, talking, we have a whole, culture at Spring Haven. The therapists, man, we've all been doing this a super long time. We still talk with each other constantly about, okay, so this situation happened, this came up. Is that me, or is that about them? What was happening in that moment, right? It's not that we just instantly know everything. Is that a knapsack or is that a manipulation? We're constantly asking ourselves that and working with each other, getting different takes on it, right? I'm kind of seeing this, but it feels what do you think? What are you seeing, right? And so So you'll need support from other people as you're sorting through it, because, yeah, that line of what is a knapsack or what isn't, is it manipulation, takes work to figure out. Maybe the question about our knapsacks changing over time, I don't know, right? I do think that there's, I think millennials get a reputation of like not working very hard or something, and I'm not sure. Like, I don't have if knapsacks are, if people's capabilities are decreasing, or if the younger generation is more attuned with self-care and doing more to prevent burnout than what the older generation has done historically. I don't know. And then, yeah, generation, religion, nationality, like what impacts the size maybe of a person's knapsack. I don't know. That's my quick answer. Well, yeah, different people are wired different, and different people are taking care of themselves in different ways. And so if you've got a lot in your stress cup, then you're going to feel like you have a pretty small knapsack. I don't know that you necessarily have a small knapsack, but you might have a lot underneath that's not dealt with, right? And as you address your stress cup better, you feel more capacity. It feels like your knapsack's bigger. So, all right. Is it appropriate for parents of adult children to be their support system caregiver? Is this the best way to help? It really depends situation to situation. So when we we'll oftentimes develop support groups. So this is like when we're working with, typically with the Amish community, it's not uncommon that we'll develop a support group, which is there's a person struggling, and then there are people in their lives intentionally that meet with them, usually weekly or bi-weekly, to help provide support. And they're sort of committed to this role of support person. And when we develop a support group, we do not include parents or ministers. We want parents and ministers to be parents and ministers, and not their support people. And so we find other church members or neighbor church members, we find other people who can be friends and care and know their recovery plan and be supportive, who will do that. Now that doesn't mean that a parent can't be a caregiver. Like, there are some situations where that is appropriate. I think maybe a question you need to ask yourself is how you're doing with it, right? If you're just always exhausted and always burned out, maybe start with some work on yourself, maybe some counseling, and then if after doing some intentional work on your own stress life, it still just feels like this is too much, like, man, I'm getting pretty good at getting rid of stress. I'm getting pretty good at recharging. This is just too much coming in. Oh, then maybe that is something I need to say no to. I need to say no to, and find other supports, find other help to support your child so that maybe you're not in the best position to do it. Oh.
Are there more yet?
Yeah, the last one, unless someone else has any. Are there churches that are doing well caring for persons? What does that program look like? There are lots of churches are doing great. You guys are doing great having this, Lots of churches do church partnership plan, which I mentioned earlier, right? So they'll reduce the cost of counseling for people, and they can pick whatever amount they want to support. They say, okay, individual session, they get a little discount just for using the church partnership program, but then you'll say, oh, we'll pay half. We'll pay 3/4. We'll pay what, and then, so that sort of makes it easy. They talk about it on Sundays. They just make it known. It's normal. It's okay. There's other programs out there, like Stephen Ministers is the name of a program that sort of is lay people that sort of help they have an intentional person that they're helping, and then they get support they get additional training and support from each other in that helping relationship. So it's sort of a program designed to support helping. That's a nice program, but lots of churches do it well. Lots of churches do it well. I think, like, with anything, right? There's like, oh, we can always keep growing, always keep learning, but, and that seems to me anyways, that the church has been more and more interested in mental health, even in the past 2 years. I think everyone just felt it more. COVID hit, people just felt it more, and the church has been more and more interested, even very recently, but yeah, that's fun.
You mentioned one book, and I'm wondering, do you have other resources that would be valuable in a church library?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know. I guess maybe because I'm not quite sure what you'd want to accomplish with your church library, right? Yeah, I can think of several books that are helpful, that are useful, that are nice. Lots of times, books on, at least the way that I most typically use books on mental health issues is in a supportive relationship where I can help them process it. And so I don't usually think of it as just having stuff out to just grab, although that's also appropriate, right? Libraries have tons of stuff, a church library could. Yeah, other than, because you do the library here, is that right? Yeah, I could look at some of the ones that we have out that might fit, that are less, like you don't want something super clinical, but something that like could kind of fit. I could look through some of our stuff and give you a list of titles. If you get me like your email, or if somebody does, I'll get you like a list of stuff that we have that would kind of fit that line. And then, yeah, you'd probably want to explore it yourself to see if it fit for you, but yeah. Good. Yes, all right. Any other questions? All right, you guys have been wonderful. It's been great. Again, you're interested, you're engaged, you're coming in on a Saturday doing this. I think we have some announcements to set us up for lunch. But yeah, thank you all very much.